until we understand that Yahweh created what is being called Hanuman, it's not just come to Christianity for your self-actualization. It's come to Christianity because this is the God that actually created everything, including that God that you're worshiping that says it created you.
If you've been following this series on idolatry with us, you have probably come to the conclusion that we don't really know what idolatry is anymore. We don't really talk about it the way that we should be talking about it in our culture today, because we've kind of separated ourselves from and lost the idea that the ancient biblical writers would have had, and even the first century biblical writers in the New Testament would have had when they were thinking in terms of idolatry. And so we thought it might be helpful to do an episode on what does idolatry look like today. So if we're going to talk about idolatry in our present world, 2024 at the time of this recording, what does idolatry look like today? We know what it looked like in the past, but how is that taking place in our current culture? And so I think that Grant is going to walk us through some other religions, some other practices that involve modern day idolatry, and we're going to look at those things. What are you thinking for today?
Yeah. So we've got a few instances. A lot of this is Eastern, and then some witchcraft. We're going to look at two examples, Hinduism and Jainism, and some things related to the modern practice of witchcraft. But just to mainly show that idolatry is still very much alive and still very much practiced all around the world.
Yeah. And I do want to put the precursor in that each of these little categories that we're going to hit kind of in rapid fire today, we are absolutely going to come back and we're going to do in-depth episodes on each of these things. So this is kind of just a 30,000-foot survey of idolatry today. And a big thing we want to do with this channel, though, is to come back and really start looking at this stuff on an individual basis and getting into great detail. So I hope you enjoy the survey. We've got our expert with us, joining us as a guest today, Dr. Stephen Ganschow. He is a double doctorate, one in neuroscience and one in counseling systems.
Nailed it.
Yes. So he's down here from Indiana, joining us in North Carolina here to help us out on a few episodes. So today, Grant Forrester, Dr. Stephen Ganschow, and I are going to talk about what idolatry looks like in our modern world. I'm Kevin Laymon. This is Veiled Kingdoms. It is time to pierce the veil.
Okay, so we're going to look at three examples of idolatry. I mean, really quick. There's a lot of stuff that we could get into here. The main point for today's episode is to remind us that idolatry is still very much a reality in the world around us. And if you travel to other places, you will see it practiced.
Yeah.
If you are confused about what idolatry really is, and you think idolatry is overvaluing something or self-gratification, then you're going to downplay the seriousness of what's actually going on in, say, Hinduism or Jainism or modern witchcraft. I actually have a testimony that I'm going to share. I'm not going to use his name because I didn't get his permission. He's a very, very, very godly young man. He was a Hindu man. He grew up in India. He moved here when he was 7 to the States when he was 7. And he came to faith in college, and in our group chat, he texted a picture of him holding 3 or 4 idols in his hand. And one of them was Hanuman. That's the monkey god in Hinduism, very important figure. His family still worships Hanuman. And so he's got these idols in his hand, and beneath his hand in the picture is the trash can. And he says, I guess I have to throw these out now. Because he'd come to faith.
Yeah.
That's literally getting rid of idols.
Yes.
Right? Like cutting bad habits isn't getting rid of an idol. Like he literally threw away his idols when he became a Christian. If we try to say idolatry is overvaluing something, you destroy his testimony. You're like, you weren't really doing anything significant. That's not really, no, that's very important. And scripture tells us it's very important that he literally came to Christ and then threw his actual idols in the trash can. He comes to faith and he worships the one true living God, and he turns his back on both the idols and the Elohim that he was worshiping before that.
I know this young man as well, and it is not as well as Grant does, but it is a fascinating story of someone who is taking literal idols and casting them out.
And isn't it so much like the enemy to make us be reductionistic of something so important?
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is essentially we in American evangelical Christianity, we take these things and we reduce them down to their most common user-friendly denominator.
Yeah.
And we reduce idolatry to this thing that is inside of us where we overprize our beauty. For example, if we want to go to a biblical example using Rachel in the Old Testament.
Oh, yes.
When in reality, this is this massive, profound, this thing with incredible implications. And it is so much like the enemy to take something so big and so profound and position us to reduce it to something that it's not, so that we don't wrestle with the implications.
Which is really why we're doing this whole series, is because we should be wrestling with these implications. So as we are kind of trying to take this and look at what it looks like in the Eastern world, which would be where our minds would go when we would first think about idolatry, we're going to show you how it shows up in the Western world as well. But I think you kind of wanted to start in looking at like Jainism or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, there are lots of examples of idols. There's something like 3 million different avatars or gods in Hinduism.
Wow.
And the same thing is true in Jainism. There's this breadth of spirituality there that they then capture in idols. And so one of the most important figures in Jainism is Bahubali, and he is the son of the first Tirthankara in Jainism. Okay, that's a bunch of gobbledygook if you don't know what those words mean. A Tirthankara in Jainism is a savior who has succeeded in crossing over life's stream of rebirths. And so in Hinduism, in Hinduism and Buddhism, it's the circle of samsara. It's life, death, reincarnation, life, death. A Tirthankara in Jainism is someone who's essentially reached enlightenment. That's the Hindu or Buddhist category, and exited that cycle of death and rebirth. And so the reason Bahubali is important is because according to the Jain belief system is that each cosmic age produces its own group of 24 Tirthankaras. So someone who's escaping the cycle of birth and death. And so think of like Buddha in Buddhism, someone who's reached enlightenment. And so the first
and
of
then
whom,
what? So they reach enlightenment, and then what happens?
They escape the cycle of life and death.
So they have to go through it many times.
Oh, in Hinduism, it could be 10,000 lifetimes before someone reaches enlightenment and then gets out of the cycle of death.
Is this like Avatar Airbender type stuff? Because doesn't he, the Avatar is like reborn?
He's reincarnated. In that universe, he's the only one that's reincarnated.
I see.
Yeah, but that's a good idea. Yeah, but he's not trying to escape samsara.
Yeah.
He's just trying to be the hero of the story.
Well, of course.
So this idea of the Tirthankara, and I promise this is going to be important in just a minute, but these Tirthankaras were someone that were semi-divine, okay? They were, in a lot of the traditions, giants. Ooh. There's our immediate connection point to what we're talking about in Genesis 6 and the Watchers and all of these semi-divine figures that are very important to worldviews, giants.
All these historical cultures
I know, man.
talk about giants.
Yeah, they decrease in stature and appear after shorter intervals as the time of these ages proceed. And so what we have here is we have Bahubali, who is a descendant of a giant. That means that he is a giant, and when a giant dies, they are a
Nephilim.
Right?
Nope.
Yeah.
When a giant dies, they are a demon.
Yes.
Their spirit becomes a demon.
Right. Daimonion, Shedim, unclean spirit. And so what we have is we have a statue of a being that was worshipped and would be considered an unclean spirit.
Right.
Which is exactly what Paul's talking about in 1 Corinthians 10.
Right.
Right. You're worshiping demons.
Which is why these giants could continue to be worshipped even after their life, because their spirit remained. Is that
absolutely
accurate?
Yeah, absolutely think so. There was still this, Goliath died physically, but there was still some sort of impression on those around him that he was there, still doing things somehow. And so they absolutely were worshipped for that.
Okay, so we're going to move on kind of to how this shows up in the Western world. And there's really several different ways we talk about idolatry in the Western world. I mean, there's the idea where we just kind of get the whole concept wrong in that we talk about it being immaterial and something that's going on inside of us, like Stephen was talking about ahead of time. We want to make it about us rather than making it about what it actually is. But there are practices that take place even in the United States. I mean, we see it on TikTok. We could see it on social media. We could see it on, we don't see it, but it shows up on the dark web and things like that, where actual idolatry is taking place, even in the Western world, but it looks a little different. Am I right, Grant?
Yeah, absolutely. And the big category for that's going to be witchcraft.
Okay. And how would you categorize witchcraft? When does someone cross a line?
It's a big category.
Okay, is it an okay category for us to explore?
I think so. And so, like,
when do you cross the line into witchcraft from just maybe like New Age philosophy, which still wouldn't be?
So the
never mind. Just my questions are dumb. You know what I'm asking.
No, it's a good question. So a New Ager's not going to see it like a biblical person is. A biblical person is going to say witchcraft is when you commune with a spirit other than Yahweh, and there are various means to do that.
That's what a biblical person will say.
Right. So sorcery, witchcraft, mediumship, divination, a lot of those things are sort of packaged together.
Yeah.
Witchcraft.
You just named a bunch of Warcraft classes.
There you go. Yeah. And so
Warlocks.
witches today might not say, like, you might have a witch that says, I don't deal in spirits.
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And so it's,
Really, a witch would say that? I don't
yeah,
deal in spirits.
there are witches who would say that, and they understand that there are spirits, and they
Okay.
will do things to ward off spirits. There's candles they use, there's incense they use, there's things that they will put in their home. Like they won't have welcome mats on their doors outside.
They
Right.
also, and there are witches that use psychedelics because they believe that self-actualization takes place within.
Yep.
And they use psychedelics for internal self-expression. So,
I see.
so
Yeah,
truth
yeah.
comes from inside of you because it's all
Yeah.
contained there.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like our next episode should be on psychedelics.
That would be good.
And idolatry. What do y'all think?
I think there's plenty there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's
Let's
plenty
do
there
it.
to
We're
talk
doing
about.
it.
Yeah. So the main figure that we're going to see a lot of the time, well, it's so not fair because witchcraft is such a broad category right now.
I know. I'm not trying
I'm
to
gonna
pit
say, oh no,
you
no,
in an
these are my
unfair
notes.
place.
So I'm getting ready to say, if you're watching this and you happen to be someone who is
and
fancy
we said
of
this was going to
Wicca
be a short
and
episode.
witchcraft, I know. I'm going to say that Hecate is the patron goddess of witchcraft, and you might not like that.
Ooh.
But there are lots of witches who will say that's the case. And so when we look at Egyptian mythology and we look at Greek mythology, Hecate was one of the gods of the underworld. She was the lady. She was their goddess of witchcraft. When we get into divine combat in the Exodus story,
I cannot wait.
we're
for
gonna
that
we're gonna see
series.
Hecate and her importance there. And then Hecate is the same god that the Greeks just sort of stole from the pantheon. Even the Greek mythology says that she was once worshipped in Egypt. She becomes the deity for them for magic as well. And it was Jason and the Argonauts. That's a great story where we see Hecate playing a role there. Hecate is often, like, if you're watching Witch Talk, which is a treat, I suppose it is for me. I just
A treat.
it's wild
Like
to see
trick or treat?
how crazy the stuff is on Witch Talk. It's just crazy. Some of the witchcraft things that are being practiced. If you don't think that this is still happening, just go to TikTok and look up Witch Talk, and you'll see people
I
doing.
mean, should people really do that though? Like, do we want people going to Witch Talk and watching it?
not learning how to do it, I guess.
Okay.
But I mean, it's like
Because I'm still trying to qualify what you meant by treat. Because I know what
Okay.
you meant, but I
Okay.
want to make sure our audience knows
If
that
you are interested-
you don't sit and just enjoy.
if you worship Jesus Christ and he is the Lord of the universe in your eyes, and you want to understand more about how witchcraft is practiced today, and you are interested in studying it, not to practice it, but to understand it better, then Witch Talk is going to be one of the places you can go to see it being actively practiced on camera. You can,
I see.
You can go, like, you
or
can watch people
you could
do.
just let a trained professional watch it
There you go.
and then come onto this show
Fair.
and tell you what you need to know,
Fair. That's fair. That's fair. They're on Witch Talk.
which is what I do.
That's there you go. And so there are things like hexes.
Sorry, go.
No, you're good. I'll take a sip.
Yeah.
On Witch Talk, there are things like hexes and wards, all kinds of stuff. But one of the central figures is going to be Hecate, statues of Hecate, statues of Baphomet, statues of all kinds of things going on in the background. And they may say this is just decoration. But knowing ritual well enough, there's no such thing as just raw decoration in a ritual setup. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a spiritual connection. And a statue of Hecate is there for a reason. One of the other ways we see this show up in witchcraft is going to be what's called house spirits. And plug to the last episode, we talked about that being one of the locations for idols inside the homes for ancient pagans and ancient Romans and Greeks. They'd have their idols above their hearth. That's the same connection for house spirits, but in the Western world. That's where that idea comes from.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna read these off. Matagot was a French spirit that took the form of a cat. And a lot of the times, they'll say these house spirits will be embodied as certain things. But anytime I'm watching them, everyone has a physical sort of talisman or idol that they reference when they talk about the particular being, which is idolatry.
Right.
And so Matagot is a French spirit who's a cat. Nisi is a Nordic spirit, similar appearance to gnomes, although the statues I see are horses when I see that. Aitvaras is Baltic, took the form of a dragon or draconic imagery. Drax or Drake, which is German, also a dragon. And Hobbs, which is English, which is going to be goblin-like or gnome-like. But all of them had certain things they did. All of them had certain connections to food or offerings to them. And they would all do something in response to you if you honored them the way that they wanted to be honored.
You know, it's interesting as you're talking about these things. I'm remembering an episode of Doctor Who. I'm remembering an episode of Doctor Who. So I'm gonna say to all of you who are watching right now, if you have not watched this episode of Doctor Who, I'm about to spoil it for you.
Yes.
I'm just telling you in advance.
Spoiler alert.
So in season 4 of Doctor Who, there's an episode called The Fires of Pompeii. Okay, so it's the David Tennant Doctor, the best Doctor, just so we're all clear. And he goes back to Pompeii with his companion Donna, and they're kind of doing what they do. And what happens is the Doctor ends up rescuing a family from Pompeii. And there's a whole
cool.
storyline behind that, but he he ends up disrupting the timeline. It's not something that he should do.
Right.
But he does it. Now, and I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but what happens then at the end of the episode is it fast forwards to the end, and it's kind of like the tail end. It's the credits are about to go. They're showing you the resolution of the story, and they take you back to this family. And one of the parents says to the children, because it was a family, they say, remember to clean the household gods.
Oh, wow.
And they went over, and it was a statue of the doctor.
It
was, and they cleaned the statue of the doctor. But you think about it this way. You know, we have this expectation, once again, that these deities don't do anything.
Yeah.
That is not what the world of Pompeii or anyone in an Eastern culture thinks. They know that these statues have power in some way.
Yeah.
And the doctor intervened. He showed up in this blue box. He saved them from a volcano. And now they see him as a being that shows up and has power in their life because he did something. There's Romans 1 in here somewhere.
Right.
Like,
they
big time.
built an image to him.
They did. And because he did something otherworldly.
Right, right.
And for
That's
us
good.
to reduce that idea down to, cutesy Doctor Who, when in reality, this is a very real thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that should blow our minds a little
Right.
bit.
Yeah.
I think it's a good fictional portrayal
Mm-hmm.
of where somebody has seen a being from outside of their timeline, outside of their universe that has come in and essentially done something supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
And their immediate response to that is, we need to have a physical representation of this thing, and we need to treat it like it was that thing that was here. And we need to keep it clean, and we need to serve it, which sounds so foreign to us in our culture. But this was really happening. These beings were showing up, and we've covered this in so many previous episodes, but these beings were showing up. They were giving wisdom or knowledge. They were taking wives for themselves, and they were advancing technology. And they would only do it incrementally, right? Like they didn't give them iPhones in 2000 BC because it would have been just too much of a leap. But they were giving them advancements in technology that was allowing the humans in that time period to see them as, like you said, otherworldly, as something from beyond. And it's because, one, I think that they wanted to destroy humanity. They wanted to give us knowledge that we would think was good. It seems good on the outside, but would eventually destroy us. And I think that they wanted to be worshipped.
You said that this seems foreign to us, and this is a thing that I've talked about a couple of times that I want to come back to again. I think there's a reason now that it's foreign to us.
Yeah.
And it's because in the rationalized West, the self-actualized West, the post-enlightenment West, the enemy has changed tactics.
Yeah.
We don't respond well to the idea of principalities and powers anymore. We don't respond well to the idea that there are forces beyond what we see and outside of our control. We've adopted a very materialistic mindset where what we see is all there is. And the goal then is self-actualization. You become the best material version of you because that's really all there is. And certainly spiritualism to some degree is making its way back into culture. I can say from the counseling field, which is where I operate the most, there's like spiritually integrated psychotherapy that's kind of made a small reemergence again. But by and large, most popular culturists, they're just thinking about the material world. So the enemy doesn't need to attack us with these things. Instead, our flesh is fed things that will make it want.
Yes.
We are led to self-gratification because we don't need idolatry anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. The reality is that idolatry is still very much alive and practiced. And so like for someone like my old Hindu friend, when people are talking about spirit, so he came to Christianity and was initially told, oh, all of those gods are sort of made up. And so this is the actual God.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
Then he bumps into, like, we all sort of bumped into Heiser's material around 2015. For all of us, we were like, wow, this is crazy. And he's like, this makes total sense.
Yeah, right.
He's like, this makes exact sense. And he's like, I understand this is hard for you guys. And he's like, but for me, he's like, you just put a biblical category on top of all of my life's experiences with other spiritual beings.
Right.
He's like, that's exactly what's happening. And for him, everything just sort of clicked because he was coming from not a materialist worldview, but a spiritual worldview outside of Christianity. And he says, that's exactly what's going on. Again,
what a guy.
it puts more context. It puts more context on what it means to convert from one of these religions to Christianity.
So we need to then be careful
Yeah.
how we're talking about idolatry
Yeah.
to people who are coming out of this.
Yes.
Because what would your friend say if we went up to him and I was like, man, I'm really struggling with my idol of Mountain Dew?
Yeah, right. He'd be like, what? Especially if he's not been catechized into like our current understanding of what idolatry is, the wrong one.
Yeah.
He'd be like,
what does that even mean?
He's like, what's in it? Like, who is in your Mountain Dew that's making you call it an idol?
Yep.
And
The mountain men.
Yeah, right. Those categories they're not there.
But think then about what the enemy has done to our minds. Right. He has made it so we don't see his movement anymore.
Yeah, right.
And it is so important that
is
we
really
do.
good that we don't see his movement anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've really tried to put my finger on a phrase that would
Yeah.
describe why he would want to take this strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Because he doesn't want us to see his movement.
No, he hates us. He hates Christians in particular.
Yeah,
and if he
yeah.
can take anything, if Satan and his cronies
Yes.
can take
There you go.
anything.
Oh, that's a real throwback.
if they can take anything and help us not see God's framework for existence for what it is,
man.
they're going to do it so
Yeah.
that we don't understand the reality of our existence, so that we don't live life in light of what it actually is, and we live a lesser version as a result.
Yeah, and then it sort of destroys the importance of conversion. Someone who's in some other spiritual context and believes that all of this stuff might be a little bit made up anyway, what does it matter if I worship Yahweh or worship Hanuman?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? And until we understand that Yahweh created what is being called Hanuman and it's deceiving all of these people, now all of a sudden we have truck. It's not just come to Christianity for your self-actualization. It's come to Christianity because this is the God that actually created everything, including that God that you're worshiping that says it created you. A Hindu man that's worshiping other gods, idols, is going to be confronted with this estranged definition of idolatry, and it should be offensive to him. It would belittle his testimony. Yeah. It would belittle the seriousness of his giving up of these gods that he loved dearly, that he worshiped and was loyal to, and then turned his back on that and his family in some senses to come to Christianity. So when he hears a pastor calling people idolaters for being too career-oriented, he's going to be correctly confused. Christians are not idolaters unless they have done any of the following things that we've outlined over the last 3 episodes.
Yeah, which would be that they have to be physical conduits, right? There has to be some kind of physical conduit, some kind of image that's been made or fashioned in the God's likeness. There has to be a fallen Elohim or demonic involvement.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an indwelling of the idol, but there at least has to be the expectation that this fallen Elohim or demon, now again, they wouldn't see it like that. They may see it as a friendly spirit, but a spirit other than Yahweh that is going to interact. There has to be an expectation that it will interact with this physical conduit.
Yes.
And then there is the expectation of a response or an action from that God because of this person's interaction with that physical conduit. Would you say that sums it up?
I think that's great. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, okay.
So this means that you most certainly are not an idolater for loving a video game or your career or your education or anything too much. That's not what idolatry is.
And maybe you shouldn't do those things.
Yeah, of course.
But it's not idolatry.
That's right.
It's self-gratification. It's indulgence.
That's right.
It can be an identity issue.
And we would call it sin. Like if somebody's putting their job ahead of their family, that's sin.
Right.
But it's not idolatry.
Right.
Well, and think about too how resistant we are to that word.
Yes.
We're less resistant to idolatry
yes.
than we are sin.
That is an excellent
that's good.
point.
Because idolatry feels like we can fix that.
Yes.
But
Yes.
sin requires a savior.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Well, we're going to continue to keep talking about this. I think we have at least one more episode in this series that we're going to be doing on psychedelics and psychotropics and their kind of quasi-connection to idolatry. But for today, that's all we have time for. If you're still with us, we have to assume that this has been helpful to you. So please consider giving a like or to the video or subscribing to the channel. If you're new here, we have lots of content that we've already put out that we would love for you to sit back and take a look at. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Stephen, thank you. Grant, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you, guys and gals, for watching, and God bless.